And we're live. What's going on, Panda?
Oh, not too much. It was pretty busy today, so this is going to be a nice distraction from the day. How about yourself?
I was too. My only problem is I feel like a lot of times when I speak, I get almost kind of bored, and I guess because I have such a dry kind of just voice and whatever. I don't want to think about my voice too much. I think it kind of a little effeminate to be like that.
Well, maybe to think about it too much, but you've got a what you call it, a unique voice. I don't even know that I'd call it a radio voice, but it's a voice that stands out. So good on you. Just keep it.
Oh well, thank you. You're not the only person that's told me that in the last 7 days. So, um,
Well, good.
it's I guess it's a good thing.
Yeah.
So I know today, or I say today, tonight, we came here to talk about these theories of America, I guess you would call them, in the sense of, basically beating the dead horse of what is, American ethnicity, American ethnic groups, and more or less the sub regions that control the country. Um, I know we had a thing on Twitter slash X slash whatever you want to call it, where Warzone, whatever you want to name it, where we were talking about these things with John Slaughter, who may or may not appear on here tonight. It just depends on if real life circumstances
The
allow him.
second half of the Alabama apocalypse.
Yes, as he calls it. I wouldn't call it the apocalypse. I'm not as terrifying of a person as he is. I'll just say that. Sorry. Anyway, where I was going with this is that we had like a we had that discussion. I think it was sometime last week about. I just checked my. I guess the story is I checked my feed or my replies, and I just see something about German Midwest Shire.
Yeah. How did we? I'm trying to think, try and trace it back. I can't remember if it was Sandbatch going off on. Oh, maybe that's what it was. He was going off on Californians being the group. If there had to be a group he was okay with migrating to the south, it was the SoCals, and then the one that he liked the least was the Midwest. Maybe it was that. And then so I had written something about, if they, first off, I said Midwesterners shouldn't go down south of the Mason Dixon line. We're too different. But then I came back and I amended it slightly a few hours later, and I said, well, what we should actually be doing is, if Midwesterners want to leave, I want them to leave. But there, for those people that do stay in the Midwest and those that stay in the South, I do think our peoples are pretty different. But then I would also say the folks that do leave, yeah, unfortunately, I'm not saying you guys need to deal with them, but I don't want to deal with them. So they can go wherever people will accept them, I guess.
Well, besides like the what I think is kind of a superficial ethnic difference between a lot of Midwesterners and Southerners, what is the main social dynamics that make them different from Southerners?
Yeah. So my primary argument would be that the the line between the landed and the peasant is thinner in the Midwest. And then the flip side of that, it's two of the same coin. Again, that line is thinner between the peasant and the aristocracy in the South. And then the other side of that is, in the South, who you are is is your standing and is your place in society. In the Midwest, a lot of times it's more of what you are or what you're capable of, and not in a completely egalitarian sense, and not in a completely meritorious sense either. But usually, a lot of headway can be made and a lot of walls broken down. It would seem to me, to an even greater degree, than what's possible in the South, um, by being capable and by keeping your head down and showing that you are capable of a particular role, whether you were born into that or not. Now, it gets complicated and it can also get very thin, and you can make the argument that I'm being arbitrary because one of the things, this is not an anti-monarchy screed by any means. I'm a big fan of monarchy. Given the choice, I would prefer monarchy over any other system. Uh, but on to extend that, I would also be good with some form of service based fascism, something along the lines of Heinlein and Starship Troopers, something that has a bare minimum stake in it. And so I'm getting a little bit lost here. Where was I going with this? Um,
Well, you were kind of talking about the difference between that people in the
yeah,
Midwest are more built off of what they could do rather
yeah.
than what they were born as.
Well, and it manifests in different ways too. And go ahead and jump in where you think, either where I'm way off completely wrong or where you would tweak it to some degree. It seems to me, an outsider who my experiences with the South have never been with the high South per se. It's always been with Appalachian, which I would argue is a very distinct area, and then backwoods, which to some degree it's not as distinct as Appalachia, but it's still distinct from the high South. When I say the high South, I mean the landed areas of the deep South. So I would Mobile, New Orleans, uh, parts of Atlanta. Nashville is garbage nowadays. Now, yes, there's the Hermitage and there's old Nashville, but Nashville and popular understandings is just,
Yeah, it's basically a bar
yeah.
town.
I was gonna say I'm trying to think of something that's not too vulgar, uh, too vulgar, profane, but yeah. So having said all that, it the little bit I have interacted with this high South, with the English of the South, is very much been more about blood and about history than certainly than the Midwest. But I would even make the argument more than the parts of Appalachia that I'm relatively well versed in. So that would be the thesis. Just that, again, the line is thinner between the landed and the peasant in the Midwest, and then who you are has less. It's not that it means nothing. Certainly not that it means nothing. And there's an argument to be made that there in the Midwest, people are judged as a group rather than an individual. So it's a different sort of judgment on the outsider. Um, yeah, I don't know. Was that clear as mud?
I mean, that was clear. I I can't attest to. Hmm, hmm. See, that's the thing is, and this is something I've noticed is people talk more and more about. They kind of have this sort of like introspection on the South, and a lot of people go on about like nobility and peasants and all this kind of old folksy kind of sort of language. But where I live, you don't. I don't exactly see like an aristocracy. I don't I don't see things that kind of reflect a more medieval neo feudal style system. I kind of see a lot of things that reflect like a more almost like a modern idea of America. Like we have like middle class, we have poor people, we have upper class. Now I guess that's kind of, looking at it from a 21st century view. But if you like put on, the third eye and you kind of see it for what it is, like you can make arguments that yes, they're, you see these people, these landowners, these whatnots, that they basically are like, your local baron, your local earl, your local lord. And I get that. Um, my thing though is I think is that the Civil War was so destructive to the South that you're not really going to find anybody that's a direct line of Southern aristocracy, at least where I live. And what a lot of people do that makes them money where I live is really only a thing because of like modern technology. A lot of these people are rich because they own these like landscaping businesses,
Yeah.
and it's like they wouldn't be doing that in the 1800s.
Sure. Well, so let's dig into this a little bit. What's your ancestry? Well, and actually, let me walk it back.
Well, that's
If
kind of
you're
that's
if
kind of
you're if you're comfortable, because I don't want you to be doing anything you're worried about doxing or whatever else. So
well, my problem with my ancestry is I don't know enough about it. So, from my understanding, is I kind of have a very American, this kind of cliche, very American ancestry in the sense of I'm a hodgepodge of things from the British Isles that made the country. So, like, I know on my paternal or yeah, it'd be paternal side, um, my ancestors were English, but the thing is, I don't know if they were Anglo Saxons or Normans because they were, regardless, they were Anglos, possibly that lived in Ireland, and that's where in Waterford is kind of what my brother's done some research into it. We just don't know if they're Normans, if they're Anglo Saxons, or they're Vikings that were there before. Then on my maternal side, my ancestors are Welsh, pretty much all Welsh. And let me
mm,
go back on that actually. So on my paternal side, so like my dad's mom's side, they're actually from like East Anglia. They're like a Puritan stock, which is really, really weird. And then on my
well, I mean, is it that weird? You're reformed, aren't you?
I would say I'm reformed,
Yeah.
not out of like, being brought up in that. I would say I'm reformed because
Okay.
I got I got
So
serious
you're
in my
reformed. You're
faith.
reformed. You're reformed by conviction, not by blood.
Yes.
Okay.
Now there's some I've had some hints, um, some things talking with family members in the past. I've kind of went back and connected the dots that I think maybe my great grandfather might have been more of a reformed take. I don't know if he's a Calvinist, but I know he didn't believe in like the whole like pre-trib rapture stuff.
Sure. So it to do a quick rabbit trail on that one, almost nobody within Christianity believed in a pre-trib rapture before 150 years ago, and there was talk of it, but it's not really anything that the church had made any speech of. And then that does get into conspiracy theories and whatnot, but dispensationalism as a thing, um, particularly one that manifests in a pre-trib rapture and then a different source of salvation, or excuse me, a different means of salvation for different people groups. That was not a thing 150 years ago.
I'm glad you posited, or I say posited, that you said that, because I don't mean to jump on the another track here on this train ride, but that's my problem with dispensationalism is it really does posit there's two different modes of salvation,
Yep.
and it's like a lot of dispensationalists don't know that. A lot of them don't believe that because most people that are dispensationalists are kind of sort of low church and low thought. And so you could tell them something, and I got to be careful about how I say this on here. just because of the times. But you would tell them something like, "Do Jews go to heaven? Are Jews God's people?" They would say yes.
Yes.
And then they would say something like, "Okay, like would Jews be in heaven?" And they would say yes.
Hmm.
And then I would ask them, "Okay, well, does a Jew that denies Jesus Christ go to heaven?" And they would say,
Yes.
some most of them I've heard said no, but then
Good.
they'll say something about like, but they're still God's people, and I was like, well, how?
Well,
I was like, how God's people aren't? You're not a child of God if you're
right.
not going to heaven, you know. So it's kind of like,
Well,
what are
s-
God's children?
we're really getting into the weeds a little bit because I mean, I would make the argument that we are all God's children in actuality, but not in present capacity if we're not Christians. And so that's kind of getting into the weeds, but I think where never mind. I'm gonna shut down that portion of the
No,
theology on it. But
that's funny because I was listening to R.C. Sproul talk some about that
yeah.
this week. I was going to say that I would not use the we're his children unless we're redeemed and saved by the Holy Spirit and washed in the blood of the sacrifice on the cross. But um, I believe RC used some term like where his like I don't think he said progeny
Well,
was the same as children, but he's basically like we would
yeah,
say like we're the created of
how
him.
how I've explained it to people is you can you can be the son of the king and you cannot yet be a crowned prince, either due to prodigal actions or simply because you're too young or whatever. And so you will be, and you are, but in capacity, you are not yet. And so that's my approach to Christianity as well. And so it's almost as if and I don't want to deny what Scripture says when it says that we're new creation and the old has gone and the new has come. I think that's probably more of an illusion of what's going on. It's it is a picture of what's occurring. But when we say, and this is where I run into loggerheads with a lot of Reformed folks, my argument would be that a person who becomes a Christian is becoming the fullness of what they already are as God's child. And so don't get me wrong, the only way in which man is made right with God is Christ Jesus. But what is occurring in salvation is a coming into the fullness of the station that you're supposed to be in. Not that you are, because you're not prior to your salvation, but you are supposed to be, if that makes sense.
I see. Yeah, I'm very careful with a lot of Christianity in the sense of I'm kind of young in the faith, and I try to sort of kind of let people that have been, believers longer, people that have, people that have read more, I let them usually kind of say, and I don't say as much except, the basic means, um, such as, only, atonement can only be purchased by Christ. It's not of any of our work. It's not of any of our merit. The only thing we contributed to our salvation was the sin that nailed Christ on the cross. And so like I said, that's really all I kind of keep with, just because I don't want to be, saying something wrong, possibly.
Yeah, well, it's a both and I think you are going to say something wrong, and I think that's part of what goes on when you're behind the pulpit. If you're going to say, "Thus says the Lord," you better be daggum sure that you're saying what's right, or that if you come to believe that that wasn't entirely correct or correct at all, that you come in humbleness before the congregation and get that straightened out. And it is a path, it's a journey. Even in the high churches, even in your Orthodox Catholic in different areas, uh, there is there are changes in doctrine, and there are greater understandings. And so I wouldn't, it's a both and. Yes, respect your eldership, and seek to always be humble, but at the same time there's a balance in there with being confident in the youth and in the passion that God gives you. So
I see. That's funny that you're talking about that. Somebody was talking about on, I think it's Facebook. They said there's a difference between like strength and dad strength, and I was kind of like, what do they mean by that? And they're talking about how like you have a lot of these people that like work out and stuff like that, and they can they're strong like young men, but that you'll have like dudes that are just like dads, just pick up all sorts of heavy stuff, do
yeah.
stuff. And they were saying like, well, what is it? And they said that it's that conviction of I got to do this for my child. Um, it basically
Oh,
makes them naturally able to lift heavier and do more.
did you see Rust Belt Kids thread earlier?
I
Well,
I
actually,
did
I don't even
not
think it wasn't a thread. It was a post. Let me try and send that to you real quick.
copy.
So you monologue for a second.
Well, I was gonna say going way back to the whole idea of the regional differences is now where I live is not Mobile, so it's very very different. And I've met some people that can be of that aristocratic stock, I guess. Um, but from my understanding, the war was so bad on the South when it took away, the let's be frank here, when the slaves were set free, it basically just destroyed the whole cash crop industry, more or less to in the idea that these people wouldn't be able to have as much wealth as they do, as they did, and so it kind of got rid of the whole trying to think. There's you never really think of like particular individuals or families in the South that were like very wealthy planners, but basically it took away the idea of like
Well, they were
somebody.
pushed into the dirt.
But yeah, that's basically it. Is that the people that were the extremely wealthy planners
Yeah.
basically lost all their money and influence, and as technology progressed and things like that, it allowed for people that were of maybe not exactly like the lower stock in the sense of they probably weren't the high rollers of the back in the day, to just kind of simply be quiet and push their way up through society. And lo and behold,
There
this
was some
guy
of that.
whose ancestors were farmers,
Yeah.
or is now like your congressman and
Well,
stuff.
there is an issue there with the nouveau rich, and this is what I was trying to get to earlier, and I didn't get to it very well. Is yes, the people who were born into money in general, and there's different things with civilizational cycles and where we're at right now with the merchant class and the different castes of people. But right now, currently, there's a group of people who have made it so that in general a person can start from nothing and they can get lots of money. But the issue with that money is lost in general over the next 3 generations. And so there's this cycling there of families. And part of that goes to the fact that when I was saying the new rich, they didn't grow up in the money. They didn't grow up with the expectation of how to handle that money, of how that money is in service to the country. And so these aren't dukes, they're not chiefs, they're not warlords, they're nothing other than the merchant class in general. In general, there's certainly exceptions to this. The easiest one is probably Henry Ford. AA is good about AA and Radla both are good about knowing some of the other men of industry, and off the top of my head, I can't come up with any of them. But that is a different form than a straight merchant, and so when we start getting into the aristocracy and all that, what I don't want to say is that um, in continental America, so to speak, in that area where the Northwest Europeans were heavy, where Germany was heavy. Uh, I don't want to say that there is no landed class, just that it is thinner. And so the landed class is going to have the best in education and is going to be more prepared to act in a gentlemanly and aristocratic way. And I do want to make sure that that point doesn't get lost in what we're talking about. And unfortunately, post Civil War, those guys who were most capable of leading the South were by and large pushed to the side. And there's really not. I was going to say there's a lot to go in that goes into that, but it's not particularly a lot. It's relatively simple. It's the men who had the most ability were either killed in the war or they were pushed out by, like you said, by the lower class, by the slave class that stayed in the South, and then by the carpetbaggers that were supported by the lower class in resistance to in a Robespierre haha kind of way by the lower classes, in contrast to the aristocratic class that had existed in the South. And there were problems with that class. This would be a great time for Slaughter to be on, because he could dig in a little bit more, certainly with more knowledge, if not with more confidence, on the aristocratic class and what the faults were within them prior to the war. My Never mind. I'm not going to go there without a high Southern gentleman on what I think were the issues.
Well, I was
So,
going to say I wouldn't consider myself some kind of high Southern gentleman.
yeah.
Um,
Well, but that I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say Slaughter is probably more of that than I am. I definitely think I'm of some kind of merchant class descent. Just clearly based off of the ancestry I found. Though my Welsh ancestors, I have a feeling they were probably farmers. Or there were people mixed in with some Scotch Irish kind of people,
Yeah.
because that side of the family is very they act like Scotch Irish people.
So dig into that if you would, please.
What, the Scotch Irish?
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
Well, I guess the kind of the get crazy from the start is I don't even like that term Scotch Irish. I think it's kind of a I think it's kind of an inaccurate term for these people. Not maybe not inaccurate.
It's inaccurate. You're right.
Inaccurate because people think, oh, these are like Irish people.
Yes.
It's just like,
Exactly.
well, it's like they're not Irish, but also a lot of them never even lived in Ireland. A lot, and the reason why I got into this whole idea is there's a guy on YouTube called the Jolly Reaver, and he makes
Okay.
these YouTube videos about basically the history of northern England and lower Scotland, also known as Lothian or the Lowlands. And so we're going to go way, way, way back. But basically, when Roman Britain fell, the Angles and Saxons and Jutes, they invaded the British Isles. They invaded there, and they pushed Celts west. Or I say Celts, Britons, Celts, whatever you want to call them. And at that time, there were some in northern England. The Celts were still living up in northern England, below what was Hadrian's Wall and above it. Now, there were two different Celtic groups there. There was the Britons, and there was the Picts or the Votadini is what some people call them. Some people call them the Votadini. I think that's the Welsh name for them. Um, and I think it might even not even be Vodadini. It might be like Yodaden, and because there's this old tale called um like Yigadaden, and it's actually about a an army from of Celts and of Britons and some Picts. They actually go down to believe it's Benborough to fight the Saxons. And it's funny, and I'm about to get into who the Saxons were that came there. The Saxons at that time were led by in that part of the country because it was not united. Was it Ethelfrith? I think it was Ethelfrith, and he was maybe one of the what you'd call Bretwaldas, and it's pretty much like Britain rulers. And so he's like one of the most like powerful Saxon warlords up to that point. And Ethelfrith was a bad dude. But anyway, where I was going with that is that these these Celts lived up there in northern England, and then these Angles come in and they settle the coast of northern England, lower Scotland, and they establish this place called Bernicia. Huge population. There's tons of wars, tons of fighting. Some other Saxons come in, or Germanics. I'm going to call them Germanics. Come in, and they create Dira. So there's this kingdom of Bernicia, kingdom of Dara, and they're fighting against people like Aldclut, which is a Brythonic Christian kingdom, in Cumbria. This is another name for this area, I believe, is Cumbria. And basically, what happens is this area is kind of like this sort of, it becomes a just genetic cesspool of Germanic and Brythonic peoples. And then the Vikings come there, which adds more Germanic DNA. But then by the time of like medieval Europe proper, like 1200, 1100, 1200, it's made more easy because you basically have Scotland on one side, England on the other. And the people that live in that border region kind of cross back and forth. It's free in the sense of English people can cross over the border to trade, Scottish people cross over the border to trade. These people are more like each other than not. And there are some kind of Celtic aspects of that culture that are more in line of the Celtic side of things and the Germanic side of things, like cattle raiding and cattle farming, and I would say more Celtic fashion is kind of done there. It's kind of practiced, um, as well as there's more like a clan kind of system rather than like a, I would say, Germanic idea of like we think of like a family or like a like a house. Um, but all the people there, look at these Scotch Irish people. Their last names are like clearly English. They're not, they're not some weird Irish last name. They're English. They're normal sounding. Even on the Scottish side, a lot of it's normal, and also too, Lower Scotland, is pretty Germanic, and a lot of the big heroes like what's his name, Robert the Bruce, his brothers, I think Clan Fraser, maybe. A lot of these people are from the southern Scotland, and there's just there's also some continental people that come in like what became Belgians, things like that there, and so it's not exactly like this Gaelic Highlander place. So these people there, they engage in kind of a more violent, wild way of living, even though it's kind of civilized, and they're kind of a lot of them are like basically criminals because they raid and rob. And so basically they get captured and they get sent to, America, or they're kind of more or less rough conditions. It's basically like, oh, we can move to this place and basically have more land there, more place to raise our cattle, livestock. We can build a cabin. So they basically move out, the Appalachians. And I was thinking about this last night, how you look at almost every like group in America that comes here, and they it seems like some of the people like Lewis and Clark, they get the grand idea, from sea to shining sea, sea to shining sea. But it seems like a lot of these people, like the Daniel Boones and those kinds, Lewis Wetzels, is that
Davy
almost
Crockett.
yeah, Davy Crockett, that they're not viewing it as like sea to shining sea. They view it as like ridge to ridge. And I
Yes.
thought I thought it's funny how the Scotch Irish settlers, they put up so much, with so much stuff, but with the natives. And what do? They basically stayed in their little hollers and valleys and farmsteads and never really went anywhere else.
Well, so this is actually one of those reasons that um, I'm willing to jump in and classify Appalachia as different from the South itself. And at least it's been my experience, you'll get a mixed bag within Appalachia when you're talking to the different people. Oh, and going back a few minutes, Ulster, Ulster Scots would be another way of phrasing it. I know Thomas says that a lot, and that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah, and
maybe that,
some of them did go to Ireland, but from my understanding, they
yeah.
weren't like
This is not
one
the
thing was
Irish.
Gales.
It's not Boston. It's not Southie and Irish Catholics and all that, right? But so it has been my experience with the folks out of Appalachia that relationship with the South is at the very least um, it's tenuous with some folks, and with some folks it is very much we are Southern Appalachia, but it's also of a different nature than what you would see in the high South, in the more urban areas and the coastal areas. It's just something of a different nature. Now, my argument would be, and this is why I think Midwest and Appalachia are more similar in some ways than the Midwest, and to put all my cards on the table, I'm I'm a Midwest particularist. When I'm talking about the Midwest, I'm in general speaking of the greater Great Lakes region. So maybe as far west as the Dakotas, following through the Great Lakes, uh, north of Indianapolis, north of Columbus, Iowa's in there, and then I would maybe stretch out all the way to Buffalo. So what you didn't hear in there is Nebraska. You did not hear Missouri. You did not hear Kansas. You did not hear south of Columbus, Ohio. You didn't hear south of Indiana. I would make the argument that those are all different regions as well. But if you wanted to find a through line between all of that and then potentially Appalachia as well, is it is a these are areas that are divorced from the centers of power, that are divorced from the more urban areas, that are divorced from the elite areas. And so it is very much small land holdings. We're not talking about plantations, even we're talking about smaller land holdings that are worked by a family, potentially a family and some sharecroppers, potentially a couple generations in there. But by and large, it is a family farm. It is a family area, a family business, and they don't have a lot of sway outside of their their town at most. Even that's somewhat questionable. Uh, that would kind of be the through line in my mind that connects these different areas. And so you could say that the real fight is between Yankee Wasps and Southern Elite,
Well,
and
yeah,
I think that would be fair.
that's the thing that I've noticed and I kind of picked up on is like people go on about like the whole wasp concept and like it's a like a JFK, even though he wasn't, he's Irish. They like it's this whole, you know, like thing where basically you to be a wasp, you have to be from like up north, and then you ask him about, oh, what about the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants in the South, and it's basically just kind of like, oh, well, like they're not wasp because like they didn't get into our system, and like the Long Island
They're
parties,
cavaliers.
and it's like it's like a wasp is a wasp, but like okay, like you're some like rich, rich prick, who whose ancestors are Saxons, and like you go out on the yacht and don't wear white after Labor Day, but then you got like Jim Bob Smith,
Yeah,
whose ancestor was a Norman knight that came over in the 1066 conquest. Like, who's to me of really a higher stock? You know,
yeah,
sorry, I kind of think heritage. Um, I kind of think the people that are something to some extent. I just imagine if your ancestors was some Norman knight that came over to fight in 1066, you're probably not like a crack addict on the side of the street. Like even today, I'll just be real with you.
yeah,
You might not be rich, but I think you're probably somebody of good character and good quality.
yeah. And so there's going to be different, and that can also be an argument that there are regional variations in what the peasant class looks like and what the underclass looks like. But certainly in every area there is going to be that difference, and perhaps the major difference throughout the states. And this conversation has been, on heritage Americans, on European Americans, and so we're not bringing in other people groups in this one. And the two primary groups that we have excluded when we're talking about European Americans is the Spanish, and then the French, which are both very unique, because one we're talking about pre-Civil War right now, and prior to the Civil War, yes, they were here, but they had already lost their influence, and so I think I think it's probably safe to say that the major division in the U.S. between those European people groups is that of the frankly it is the landed English class and everybody else, and then what everybody else takes part in inadvertently, or at least is on the receiving end of, is the infighting between the English landed class.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, especially if you're referring to like the whole like New England versus the like the South. It's like they're all the same stock more or less. And
Right.
the thing is though too is like a lot of these people, because I kind of hang around like what I call neo Confederate circles, and
Sure.
they're
Yep.
always acting like people up north, like people in New England, are like
Yeah.
a different race.
Now
That
be careful, Otto. I don't want you to accidentally burn any bridges tonight.
I'm not planning on burning any bridges. I'm just saying like I don't I don't know how just because your ancestor is like an East Anglian, like a East Anglian merchant, how that somehow makes you a different race, like a dude whose like ancestor was like a horse breeder out in like I'm thinking of a particular place in England, out in like Lancashire, or like what's I'm thinking of an actual Somerset. Yeah, like
Yeah.
I don't know how like that makes you some kind of quasi different race, but apparently it does. But I've never really.
Well, you've already hit on it. It's where does the blood come from? Is it Norman blood? Is it Saxon? Is it Welsh? Is it whatever? And then for all the rest of us, we just don't care. We've got our own issues going on, and now this it's interesting in that it manifests. It seems to me in the elite focus, particularly in lawfare and in the universities and things of that nature. And so you have that area, and that's in contrast the to the trades, to the working with one's hands, to agriculture and things of those nature. And so I wouldn't say either is wrong for the American kid, who's 20 years old and he's trying to figure out, well, which way is he going to go. Go where you can with and do what you can. But yeah, I think what we're seeing wash out right now is the elite class and the country squires. Maybe that's a fair understanding of it. Even within aristocracy, you do have those people in the hinterlands that are uh, men of power and men of action, but certainly not to the same degree as those who are closer to the crown, closer to London or wherever.
Yeah, the people that have the ears of the court. What do you mean by country squire exactly? Like, I have an idea in my head, but I know like Paul Fahrenheit wrote that book, and I've
I'm
never.
not familiar with that. Okay.
Oh, the Country Squire's Notebook. It's
Yeah.
basically like it's this little short book he wrote that's pretty much about like a mythologized version of Virginia,
Okay.
and it kind of goes through like in this just these different stories about different parts of the state and the different like kind of backgrounds of people. And the really cool part is there's a like Odinic Robert E. Lee
Mhm.
in it, and it's really really weird for sure.
Yeah.
So it's a good read.
Well, I'm going to have to look that one up. So, what I mean when I'm saying country squire is the county sheriff, the uh, land broker. Potentially, it is a plumber or the big farming family within a county. That's sort of what I mean by uh, the country squire. It's somebody who isn't necessarily a lawyer, isn't necessarily working within the state university system or anything of that nature, but is a mover and shaker within his community.
Ah, I see what you mean. See, I always kind of took the idea when people meant like country squire. Um, I always kind of had like this idea that, like it was like I don't want to say like a negative, but more like a I don't know, like he was somebody just kind of like a vagabond. They just sort of kind of roam around.
No, what? So a squire in English aristocracy was an actual position. I'm trying to remember. It was above a yeoman.
Yeah, like a squire is
It
like a.
was
It's basically a. It's
yeah.
like a. It's like a. He's like a servant to a knight, pretty much. At
And so
least.
there is still a semblance of power there. There is still somewhere within the hierarchy that this person is, but in reality, to the king and his mission, it's unlikely that the squire is going to have any big impact on that. And so that's sort of what I mean when you get to the movers and shakers of the county. It's unlikely that they'll have much of an effect on any of the elite. However, there's 100% movers and shakers within any given county, out in the flyover states and no man's land within the U.S.
I see. Yeah, I know. Like in England, they have the Shire system,
Mhm.
and back in the day, I did some research on like basically on more like medieval warfare, and it was basically kind of like what's the lowest bar of entry for somebody who's a knight, and basically you would be like the knight of your local shire, and that's it. A shire is even less than like a county, I think. There's nothing really. I don't. We don't have anything in America. I think that could even like a shot like a you might have for a like if you were to like make
A
this
hamlet.
geographically, maybe like you would have one night like you'd maybe have like 5 nights per county.
Yeah.
Is basically like idea. So like take whatever county you live in and like divide it up, and then like by each town, and that's
Right.
like a shire. But I think a shire was actually something even more precise. I think it was actually it was land from like one set of grove of trees to another. It's
Yeah.
like a really kind of small
I'm sure at
area.
some point they had some sort of a defining system for what exactly that was and what standing it had within the realm. And part of this also goes back to logistics and potential. And so I think we talked one time on my channel about horses and how the U.S., especially New England, was formed around the same ideas of a horse town, a horse city. And so what that means is that in rough numbers, a horse can be expected to move between 8 to 12 miles uh, round trip, round trip, and that's pulling an entire load of goods, of pulling an entire family, of doing some sort of work. Now, certainly a horse can go, if you've got a good horse, you could probably do 20 miles one way over a day. But that was one of the issues that would dictate where cities were formed and how they were created when we were first coming over to New England. And so that plays into it somewhat. And I don't know if that plays into the Shire idea. Uh, anyway, yeah, I'm not sure where I was going with that.
Well, I know for me though, you're talking about the shire stuff. And it's kind of funny because you're going about like the South is not the closest thing to Shire, but
Yeah.
for me, there's actually a place nearby where I go to church at, and they grow a lot of cotton and corn, which are not European at all by any means.
Right.
But just for some reason, the way these houses are, and there's all these like tree lines that like there's a tree line like a little forest, big field, little forest, big field,
Yeah,
the whole
almost
area.
hedgerows.
Yes, kind of
Yeah.
like the bocage sort of, and it's like, and the houses are like really small. That like
Yeah.
but really small. I mean like they're not tall houses.
Right.
For some reason, I just always thought that's what England looks like, and the roads are really like windy. They kind of
To
not
yeah,
straight.
to a degree, yes. There, and I'm having never been to England, just sort of guessing here. It makes sense to me that urban England would be parts of Virginia, and that rural England would be Kentucky, Tennessee, not West Virginia, but Western Virginia, sort of that Cumberland Gap area. Maybe not so much the mountains, but the hill areas. Um, yeah, Bowling Green, and there's some interesting areas in Tennessee and Kentucky. But it makes sense what you're saying there with the Shire being down there, because I do think they were formed in that way. So what I would draw attention to when I made that thread, in particular, why I was saying that the South is not the Shire, is because of the aristocracy that exists within the South, and the two classes being the non-landed. If it's not an outright underclass, we'll say the peasant class, as well as the landed aristocratic class. Now you see that less in the Midwest. What you do see, and I think this was good that John called this out in his what did he call it? Foundations, whatever his thread was, where he talked about the different people groups. One of the things that you'll see in the Midwest sometimes is a managerial takeover. And that happens because if if rather than having the grill pill, you had the farm pill or the work pill, like in the Midwest, it's all we wanted to do was work. All we wanted to do was farm. Like we weren't here trying to set up this craziness because we were too busy putting lighthouses on the daggum Great Lakes and building locks and canals and uh, you know bringing down trees and conquering that part, dealing with Iroquois, whatever. And yes, you have the French Indian Wars and all that. So whatever. But I think you see what I'm saying about where the emphasis lied in that area. And you have the Dutch as well, and then certainly the Germans were in there, and it was just this focus on living your life and building in that area. And so how that's connected to the managerial takeover is because by the time we were in there doing all of that, there was already, both by historical emphasis, being the English people, and then by um, not logistics, but by business emphasis, by natural evolution within the city, there was already a business class that was able to see what was going on over in the Midwest and come in and capitalize on it to a greater degree than the people in the Midwest could do amongst themselves.
I've never really thought about that, but that does make sense. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
It, so he's absolutely right on that. In that line, when I'm saying the line between the landed and the underclass is thinner in the Midwest, that's part of the issue that enables managerial takeover. Because if there can be a sheen of capability on a person, that can push them into an area where they wouldn't get in the South because they didn't have the correct name or they didn't have the correct lineage or whatever. And so there's, thankfully, throughout that thread that he made, there is the he listed vices and he listed both positives and negatives of the individual groups, and I think that was good. I think he was pretty good on most of those. There's some tweaks I would have in there based on bio, not strictly biospirit, but HBD, the area that people are in. I do think winter plays an outsized role in the continental European peoples, especially there in that northwest region. And that's part of the reason that they're so different from the Iberians, from the Italians, and so on. And I
oh
just think,
yeah,
yeah, I think that's part of what plays into that thread that John made.
yeah. That's the thing about like Europe or just in general about life, that we we live in a world that is so uh, weather avoidant, in the sense of, like when it's hot outside, we just go inside. When it's cold outside, you just go inside. You never really have to deal with the weather, and you don't have to really like fight it in a sense. And now back, for 4 years of my life, I dealt with the weather pretty significantly when I was in school, walking around a lot. And yeah, I mean there were some nights. I mean, it was just like just hitting yourself on the back of the head. Why did I come out here? Why did I decide to go get some food? It's freezing cold outside because you got to walk, like 2 minutes to your car, and it's just actually like maybe 5 minutes.
Did you say
Sometimes
it
it's
was
1 minute.
freezing cold
Freezing cold.
in Alabama?
Yes, and it's just like sometimes it's just like why would I do this? And it kind of taught me, you know, to be more respectful of the weather, in the sense of be more weather aware. I know back in January when I was squirrel hunting, it was like negative, not negative, no, it was like 20 degrees. And something about when it drops down below freezing, you just notice, like, severely notice a difference. And I remember I stayed in like a little cabin, and I mean, if we didn't have a fire going, we would have died. Would have got hypothermia and died. And it's just so weird being, because that's the environment people all the way up to 100 years ago lived in. When if you lived in the 1800s or before, when you woke up in the morning, most people, you didn't have AC, you didn't have anything that turned the heat up. You had to have that fire going.
Yeah. Well, so going down into the south, it's there's a lot of things that we don't think about when it comes to the area, like you just mentioned. And my one of my theories, I have no idea if this is true or not, but I almost think the cold feels colder in the south because of relative humidity. And I could be just
I
because of the moisture in the air. But
I haven't I've never thought of that. I've experienced the cold up in Iceland before,
yeah,
but it's one of those things, like, it was so cold there that I guess what I can say is, like, I didn't really even feel the cold there because I was so wrapped up in clothes that
maybe. Yeah.
I was more warm than cold just because of that. But there was one early morning I got up, I stuck my head out the window because the room I was in was so hot, because we were wearing layers pretty much every waking hour that we were there for some reason. And I remember it was like just one of the maybe the coldest I felt in my life, but it felt so good. It felt almost like freeing.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is where I should be. This is where I should be living at.
Right.
And it's like, it's funny that you do all that in the same week, and then you come back home and it's like 1,000,000 degrees outside.
Yeah. Well, so and I'll run some things past you real quick on how I think the weather and the external pressures affect the different people groups that are in there. One, like I said, I wonder if the relative humidity ends up making the South feel colder. I know North Carolina for me, I had some pretty cold times in North Carolina, which still just sounds absurd. And this was coastal Carolina. This was not Western Appalachia. But when you have the heat that the South has, it can limit productivity. When you throw in the humidity that the South has, it absolutely limits productivity in comparison to a place that has less humidity and the air is easier to breathe. Now, that can, of course, go to too high of we're always sort of chasing the middle and the optimum. And you could go too far in the other direction when you're out in Denver and you can't breathe because it's just the air is too thin and you're not used to it. But what will also happen there is that with the humidity, with the heat, there's a different parasite load that exists down south in the summer than there is in Wyoming. And so that parasite load is going to limit the different agricultural, uh, both the livestock and the crops that you can grow. And it's like, well, yeah, duh, panda. It's not a yeah, duh. It's how is this stuff going to affect you as an individual and what your body was made for? How is it going to affect the the livestock and the crops that are grown there? It's not just that they can't be, it's why can't they be? There's a sheep called a dorper, and it's a very popular sheep out in South Africa. It's a mix of a Dorset, which is an English sheep, and then Persian black sheep. For some reason, these Dorpers gained in huge popularity roughly the 90s, the turn of the millennium, and a lot of folks started bringing them over. Unfortunately, for some reason, and it happened with boar goats as well. I don't know why they kept running to South African breeds and then bringing over here and starting to use them east of the Mississippi, especially down south. these animals weren't designed for that. They were designed for dry climates. So when you bring them in and you put them in a entirely different parasite load, one, that can start affecting their capabilities. And then it's not just the parasite load, but it is the actual moisture that's in the ground. Their hooves weren't built for it. And so dorpers, straight dorpers, and we're starting to get to the point now where we've bred them to such a degree that they can handle these areas better, but they're still not a great sheep for these hot, humid areas. It's not the heat that does it, but it's the humidity, and it's the mixture of the heat and humidity. They're not built for it. And so I think that example within sheep husbandry, it's very easy to make the jump to people, that there are people groups that are not built for the South, that there are differences between Kentucky and Arkansas. Certainly, there's differences between West Texas and Georgia, and there's differences between Virginia and Louisiana. And so, why we think these things don't affect us doesn't make sense to me. And when you look at where the different people groups wound up after they came from Europe and came into the US, they still live where they lived in Europe. And they just came to the US and they made it the new Europe. And so the English you find a lot along the coast, and spread they're spread out as well throughout the country, but uh, their big cohorts are found in coastal areas and in urban areas. And then the not the Scots Irish, the Ulster Scots, will go that way, and the Scots in general, you find them in the mountains. The Spanish you find in Florida, more sort of that Iberian type area. And then well, in the Basque we won't get into that. There's outliers, whatever. But the Germans, the Northwest Europeans, they went inland into the continent, and they went to those big areas of water, those colder areas. Did I get all the major people? I think I got all the major people groups. But what you can see is this, like I was saying, they took Europe and they transplanted it in the New World. And what they, unlike, say, Australia, New Zealand, uh, where they almost had to adapt to it in an entirely new way. Excuse me. What they could do when they came to North America, excuse me, what they could do when they came to North America was just straight up take what they had and transplant it, form it around what North America was already offering.
That's an interesting theory. And I've never really thought about the whole people like goats kind of thing. I've always thought I just had this week really thought about that, it's really funny that the people that are living, and I always think of like West Virginia because that's the most like hollowed out, down in the ravine, basically down in the holler kind of state I've been to. I mean, I know Tennessee has got some places like that, but I mean,
Well,
like,
you have to be out in Knoxville, Eastern Tennessee, tri-state area to get to that. And
yeah,
so,
I mean,
yeah,
I have been, but it's like,
I'm agreeing with you.
yeah, I've never like when I go to like Cades Cove though, it's like more like wide open kind of places. But like in West Virginia, you're literally like, oh, there's a mountain right above me, like a huge giant peak. Oh, there's like a little house down in that little holler, and
Yeah,
it's
and
like,
when you say a holler, you're not joking. What, and for anybody that's uninitiated, what he's talking about is it's a miniature valley, and it can be big enough that there are 1,000 families in there, but it can also be so small that there's 3 families in this holler. And it's just a miniature valley, and it's usually tight knit communities because this is the area that has a flow of water or whatever, and that's how they live. Sorry, not to jump
Oh no,
into
you're
it.
good. Oh no, you're good. I was gonna say that like there's even some that are just like smaller than that that like I've just came across like hunting before.
Yeah,
Like
they're
you just like
absolutely
it just drops down, and you have no conception of what to call it except a holler. And that's
yeah.
the thing too is it's hollow, but I don't know where holler came from. I guess it probably came from some people.
Somebody's accent. Yeah.
Well, I think it probably is a pun on words
Oh,
or play on words because
okay.
my thinking is that probably back in the day when the long hunters and whoever it is were coming in here, that probably when they were crossing through them and stuff like that, trying to make contact or something, they would like yell. And it's like, what did he do? Oh, he hollered or something like
Okay.
across the hollow, and they nickname it holler. It's just a theory. It's a
Okay.
conspiracy.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
don't know how true it is, but I kind of think that that's probably is probably a play on words that has been lost to time.
Well, and it's how folks use words, and so my grandfather, he's when I say he's from Kentucky, he's from Kentucky, and he's not from Western Kentucky. He's from Appalachia, Kentucky, and he, as the story goes, he said, I didn't see the sunrise over the horizon until I was 13 years old. He said, because I lived down in the holler, and he says, so the sun came out, 9 o'clock or so, and it was already halfway through the sky. So,
Shoot, yeah, that's something that I've never thought about too. Is that like you live somewhere that's more mountainous and stuff like that, and you live down in it.
right.
You're not gonna really see the sun. And like riding through, I think I rode through what was it? It was like the not the Blue Ridge Parkway, but I rode from like Gatlinburg down into Cherokee, North Carolina one time, and it was around evening time in winter, and I remember how
You might have crossed over the Blue Ridge.
I just remember how like it when you
Yeah.
get down in there because there's some parts where you go like
Yeah.
drop down into it,
Yeah.
and it's just nothing but shade. There's no sunlight really. It's just all shade.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, boy, that's a show in and of itself, is Appalachia and what that means, and the hunting culture that comes out of it, the dogs that come out of it. It's yeah.
Yeah,
But that go ahead.
I was gonna say that that's the thing is that like when I have to kind of examine like what am I culturally in the grand American sphere, it's like I just have to assume that I am of the more Appalachian take of the stock because I'm where I live is definitely not like the old South. Um,
Right.
and it's just like I just kind of viewed it as like if you live in the South and you see mountains, hills, mountains, whatever you want to call it, where you live. If you're in the Piedmont, I would say you're in Appalachia or Appalachia, whatever you call it. I
Yeah.
always called it Appalachia, but then when I actually read it, I see like why they call it Appalachia.
I don't know what's right. And then it's a question too of, what counts. We're talking about West Virginia, and then, what about the Poconos? What about, are there parts of Pennsylvania that count as Appalachia? Are there parts of New York? What technically does the Appalachian Trail end in Maine?
Yes. See,
Yeah.
that's my thing is I would consider it to be its own culture,
Yeah.
but that those but that
Same.
those but that the culture of it is southern and that the rest of it, from my understanding, it's kind of just influenced by the north. Like you go from like Pennsylvania, the people that live in the mountains there are just like people like Pennsylvania, like rural Pennsylvanians live in the mountain. All
Well,
our
so it's a
Germans.
it's a question, right? Like folks in the mountains of Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, let me walk it back. The people that live in the Blue Ridge Mountains, are they more like folks from New Orleans, or are they more like people from the Poconos?
Hmm. I would think in day to day living, probably more like the people from the Poconos,
Right.
but I think they would have more affinity, maybe in a maybe in like a now they would, I mean they'd probably have a lot in common with some Cajuns, you know, some rural dudes from Louisiana. Um, I think they
Maybe.
I
Sorry,
think
go
it just
ahead. Yeah.
depends. Like I think it's like they would probably think of themselves as having more similarity to do with like some dudes from like Louisiana,
Right.
but that like probably day to day living
Yeah.
without them realizing it, they have more in common with their lifestyle movement patterns they would with people from up north in the Poconos than
Right.
like you know
Well,
Louisiana.
and that goes back to, several minutes ago we were talking where maybe the major distinction is, regardless of how people classify themselves, is the major distinction this landed English class in contrast to everybody else. So
I kind of see what you're saying with that. You know, it's basically them versus the world.
yeah, but and well, I was gonna say I don't want to say verses because I don't know that they believe it, but I don't know. Sometimes I don't want to swing the stick too hard, but yeah, I think sometimes the Southern fellas do believe it's them versus the world. But
Well, I would definitely say I'm kind of prone to that to an extent because you know,
yeah,
like I'm somebody that would have like I'm like for me like I'm never gonna like make fun of another Southern state.
yeah.
Like I'm never gonna sit there and say I hate Georgia, I hate Mississippi, I hate Louisiana, I hate Texas, I hate Oklahoma, I hate
So
Tennessee. Like I'm not gonna say I know I said Oklahoma. I
well,
said
but does Texas count? I don't
well,
know.
I think I view what the South is. I view it as all the states that seceded from the Union in 1860, or more or less were culturally of that. There's a actual in my mind though. There's a actual like cultural map, but then there's
Yeah.
like a political map. I just view it like this: take some dude from take some guy from like southern Oklahoma or like the plains of Texas. He's
Yep.
probably going to have a lot more to do with some guy that's like a Montgomery County cattle farmer, cattle rancher, than he is like a Florida cattle rancher, than he is like, you know, some dude like up in Montana who does the same thing. They'll probably all
Well,
actually have a lot in common because their
well,
job.
I was gonna say maybe, but who's he gonna have more in common with? Oh, I don't know. A Latin professor from Atlanta, or a dairy farmer in Wisconsin,
Oh, dairy farmer, easy. And that's the thing.
right? But that's yeah. I mean,
That's the
that's
thing. That's the thing with modern America, though, is that some of these cultural things are like almost like losing their point. I mean, it's like, I
yeah,
mean, shoot, like I got a friend that's from like urban New York, and like I remember one time we kind of were going around doing like redneck kind of things, like shooting guns and riding around the
yeah,
woods, and it's like it just seemed almost like kind of like he just kind of like melted in,
right.
and it's kind of sort of like you know like that's what I find interesting about this stuff is that you know some like you just you know like I'm pretty sure there's like I bet you there's like some urban Italian dude up somewhere in New York that he probably likes to deer hunt. You
Yeah,
know, it,
yeah.
it's stuff like that, and it's like I just find it kind of fascinating that there's that the you know the American Empire, Babylon, whatever you want to call it, is kind of sort of like coalesced all these groups together to be more the same than not. And even I think back in the day, I mean, let's be real here, like Germans and English people are of that same Nordling stock. I mean, like it's us versus the Italians, man.
Yeah,
Like, like,
meds.
well, it's like I see. I've always heard there's some stereotypes that like like people that are going to be like from Eastern England or German descent in America, like they're always going to be like tall, kind of like these like beautiful sort of people.
Mhm.
And it's like I get that, and it's like you see a lot of these people with like the Scotch Irish kind of stock and a lot of stuff. They're kind of like broad, sort of kind of like. I mean, I guess the beard, if you shaved them all or made them all, looks max, like it'd be one thing.
Yeah.
But it's like, like a lot of like these Midwestern German people, I see some, they kind of like these like almost like beautiful kind of people. And a lot of these people down south are kind of sort of these like British sort of people. I've even seen some that kind of remind me like Slavs to some extent. Like
Okay.
when you work construction, you're just kind of rough. Like it,
Yeah.
I guess
Wait.
it's just
Yeah.
odd to see.
Uh, oh man, I had something, and then you made the comment about Slavs, and now I forgot it.
Well, you're gonna try to describe like where Slavs moved to in the country, because I really don't know. I feel like they're
No,
kind of like
well,
all over.
I think they are all over. There's definitely some of them in the Midwest.
The only ones I've ever really heard of, some there's the big faction of them in Chicago, and there's a group of them down in
Yeah,
Florida.
there's a lot of Poles in Chicago.
Yeah,
Well, now do Poles consider themselves? I don't know.
I mean, yeah, they're. I mean, it's like saying like English, Germans,
Right.
Norwegians, Danish, Dutch, like Germanic.
Oh, that's it. I got a story for, and I can't remember where I heard it. I probably heard it. I probably heard it something OGC adjacent or whatever. So you might have heard this story before. But there was a woman, and she was out in Appalachia, and this was after World War II, and she didn't have any electricity, didn't have any running water, and so she would have to walk out to her well. And she walked out there one day, and she went to get herself some water, and there were three men standing there. And don't know how, don't even have any clue where the story uh, how this happened, but there were some German POWs, and they had gone and they had escaped the camp, and they had ran up the mountain. They had found her well, and they were drinking water from it. And she said, "Now you boys better get." And they kept drinking water. Oh, Frau. And she said, "You better get." And they didn't. So, like a good Appalachian woman, she shot all three of them dead. She called the sheriff, and the sheriff came over, and he gets to looking, and he said, "Now, hun, why'd you do this?" And she said, "Well, they were drinking out of my well." He said, "Oh man, these were the German prisoners that we were trying to keep track of." And she said, "German?" And right there, she sat down and she started crying, and she was inconsolable. And the sheriff goes and he said, "Now, what are you crying about?" She said, "Well, I just shot and killed three German men. I thought they were Yankees."
Yes, I've heard that one
Yeah.
before. That's I don't know how some of that kind of like lost time kind of
Yeah.
stuff is persistent in the South. I do know that there was an excerpt from in the Spanish American War. Uh, Joseph Wheeler, who was from Alabama. Well, he's from Massachusetts or Rhode Island originally, but he lived in Alabama and he was like a U.S. congressman. Well, he
Yeah.
was like one of the head generals down there. He was a Confederate cavalry officer too. In the Spanish American War, like one of the first battles, they put the Spanish to flight, and he just like broke out in this like ecstatic excitement and just started yelling at the soldiers. Said like, "Come on, boys! We got the Yankees on the run. We're about to roll them up and lick them like a wet
Wait, which?
cartridge."
Okay, yeah.
But from my understanding, most of the troops that were under his command were from up north because they were still, they're like the regimental systems, a lot of like, northern regiments from the war. And they
Yeah.
just looked at him like they didn't know like if they should take that as like a positive or like, I mean, they probably took offense to it. But
Right.
those people's fathers were Civil War vets, but he apparently just broke out this ecstatic, like semi like possessed kind of state
Yeah.
when he saw it.
Well, it's interesting. There's up in Wisconsin. There, it's not exclusively Wisconsin. It's Wisconsin, and then Indiana and Michigan. I think it's just those states. But there was something called the Iron Brigade, and for whatever reason, these military service is something in the Midwest that you're proud of, and it's something that you do to the best of your ability, and then it's something you move on from. And so while I will take exception to some of the things I've heard on German stock and Midwestern stock and those folks in the military and so on, uh, what I will also acquiesce to is it. It's not that it means less, but it's different. I'm not quite sure how to put it. It's just um, yeah. Like I want to say military service isn't a person's crowning achievement in the Midwest, but that's not totally fair because you look at somebody like John and um, he he recognizes it, but he doesn't live in that, and so
I would say
I'm
from
just trying to I'm having
my
a hard time
understanding,
describing it.
in the South, it seems like being in the
It's
military
not
is a
as
kind of
martial a
achievement.
culture. But now this gets into interesting things too, and I think this can get into the theories of the world wars and what was occurring within the German state and why the German state, if Germans are so incapable in the martial arena, why they were able to give the world so much trouble during both the world wars. And my answer to that would be there is, and this goes back to when we were talking about managerial takeover. When a when a group of Northwest Europeans has decided something's going to be accomplished, that's it, and your very being is as a part of the group, and so it's less about the individual soldier and it's less about particular acts of valor than it is the consistent application of martial fervor. That's my theory, at least. And I don't know if it's true, but it makes sense in my head.
Well, I
And
mean,
so then
the Prussian state was a very
when the
effective.
war is over, again, because it wasn't necessarily or exclusively an operation of individual valor, but more of group valor. When the group has decided, all right, now it's time to get back to farming, it's time to get back to work, then the participation within the wars, it's not that they mean less, but that they don't affect life as much as necessarily a war hero uh, from the Ulster Scots or from the English would participate in life. I don't know if that made any sense.
No, it does, because I think I've noticed that, like in the South, like if you were like in a
Oh, I'm
military
not hearing you.
combat. Oh, hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Otto, you dead, man.
Hello.
I saw you mute and then unmute. Is this something on my end?
Could be. I don't know if the viewers. It's looks like it's working on my end. Um. Hmm.
Hmm.
Hey, can you hear me? Man,
All
blood.
right, let's see if we can fix this. Hmm. Dead air. Nobody likes dead air.
Hello?
Let's see.
I can hear you if you can hear me.
Seems good. I'm not seeing anything on the stream if you're talking, Otto.
I
Doesn't look
I'm
like
talking.
your Abby's doing anything.
I hold on.
Looks good on my end. All right, bud. I'm going to log off and then see if I can jump back in here.
I hope that y'all can hear me on this. Let's see. Hey,
Can you hear me?
yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. I'm not sure
Okay.
what.
I don't know what that was at all. Um,
Okay.
I guess it. I don't know. All I know is it showed me talking on my end,
Yeah.
and but I guess anyway to continue that conversation, you're talking about you're talking about like the basically when the war's done, people go back to farming. I'd say in the South that basically like honorable military service, especially that a combat, is kind of carried with you throughout your whole life.
Yeah. Did what I say make sense?
No, it does, and it's like I don't know why they always say it, and I think there's something to do with probably the Holy Roman Empire being kind of a thing, but it seems like German society is a lot more dedicated to like the group think task kind of everybody builds this thing, does this thing, and I just think it probably has something to do with like being under the government of the Holy Roman Empire. Um, I
So here's my theory, and this is going back to HBD. My theory is that the winters are heavier, and I don't know if that's remotely true.
in Germany probably so than England. I think England because it's surrounded by the ocean, it it basically makes it like it's kind of like cold, but
Right.
it's not like snowing really. I mean, it snows in England, but not all the time. Like it's not like this. Like I don't know. I don't think of England being like a particularly like cold, like a freezing cold place. I think it being more like a windswept kind of place.
Yeah. So the overall snowfall, the annual average snowfall in Germany is a total of 94 centimeters. So that's, about 3 feet. Snowfall in England. Um, I'm looking. Let's see. Not finding anything yet. All right. Average yearly snowfall in England. Oh, this is very interesting. I'm not finding. So I would have to dig into that. I don't know. I'm not finding any quick answers, but that would be my guess is winter. That the winters in the continent are harsher than the winters in England.
I would definitely agree to that. I mean, we know they're going to be worse the further east you go into Europe. Um, and just like I said, like you see things that like winter in like France, winter in like the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany. You never really see it for England. You never see it for Ireland. You definitely see it for Scandinavia. So I think
Yeah.
it's kind of sort of like a That's probably what it is.
Yeah, and so that would be my guess on why there's more groupthink, so to speak, between the continent and England, and that's just one instance of it, because it could also be that for whatever reason, England, and then ultimately America are both the culmination of genetic outliers within the Germanic people.
Yeah,
And so then England is a step on that path. The various reformations and moving into Presbyterianism, Congregationalism, and the different polity within the churches. Those are all expressions of whatever it is that's inside of the Englishman. And so then that comes out here to the States. And so that would be my guess, both external pressures, and then I would be open to hearing an argument that there is something native to the Englishman's biospirit, which could also play into the idea of the clannishness that goes on with the Scots, because it is a harder environment up north past Yorkshire and the border area once you're
yeah,
actually into Scotland. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm not saying it's exclusively the reason, but and I'll to put my cards on the table. I'm a fan of Dutton. I think Ed Dutton makes a lot of sense, and so these external pressures affecting how people interact.
yeah. That's probably the case.
Yeah,
I would think. I would also like to probably maybe hypothesize that more, united, kind of like the Holy Roman Empire kind of thing. Whether it be old Germania, where they united against the Romans,
right.
or the Holy Roman Empire, whereas England's basically these like waves of invaders, and then you have like the kingdom there, basically just for like a united kingdom there, fighting other kingdoms and things like that and whatnot. Which wars take people coming together, but at the
Yeah.
same time, wars kind of cause chaos.
Well, and it's interesting how hmm, it's interesting how different people groups express themselves differently, and it's how do you track that down? Like, we're making the argument that it's external pressures that cause the Germans to act differently, but then if that's the case, why is it that all people groups in the snow don't act the same as Germans? Why is it that architecture becomes something? And so, is it as simple as because the building blocks that they had in China were different than the building blocks they had in Germany? Yeah, maybe, but when it seems like when we're trying to really delineate between the mechanics of HBD, of biospirit, of external pressures, it's almost like theology in that I think we can almost get to the point where we're trying too hard to discover the mechanics. But if the principle is true, we can just kind of rest in that.
Yeah, and I would say we probably just have to rest into it to some degree. We don't know how, or I don't know if we'll ever know how. There's no way we can really. Yeah, I mean, I get. Yeah, I don't even know where I was going with that. I think you just assume the weather has more to do with salt, being the origin of that than let's say the political history of like Thuringia.
Yeah. So, and that takes us all the way back to why one, I argue that the Shire in the U.S. is the Midwest, and again, it can be fractal. There are areas like you've already described in Alabama, and then there is an expression of it within different hollers, but then like I've said, I think the Midwest in general fits the Shire idea. And then on top of it, where else was I going? I got lost, but yeah. So
No, you're all good. Yeah, and I guess it's like, they don't call it the peaceful Shire South. They call it the dirty South, you know.
yeah, portions of it for sure. I mean, there is a high South out in Richmond that is. Yeah, so I'm getting a little bit over my skis here, but there's something going on in Richmond in regards to the South that I haven't experienced in other areas. Now, part of that I'm sure is ignorance, in that I haven't spent much time in Mobile. I haven't really spent any time in Atlanta.
Well, you're not missing
That
much about Atlanta. Atlanta, that's the thing is Atlanta's not like it's not like a culturally American South city in the way that I'm trying to be kind of it's black.
okay.
I mean, like
Yeah.
Atlanta is like,
Yeah. Well, I mean that's fair. That would make it.
but
It is a completely different.
it's not like New Orleans. Like from my understanding, like Atlanta before that was almost like a Atlanta's kind of like a Birmingham, except instead of like manufacturing, because your Birmingham was known for like the ironworks and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Atlanta is just kind of like it was already a big city in Georgia. I guess the news and media and hospitals, hospitals, yes, for Atlanta. The airport, which was supposed to go to Birmingham originally, but
Yeah.
we're not going to talk about that. Um, yeah, Atlanta's kind of just like a. I mean, the only thing I know that I mean, the only word I'm gonna say is black. Like, it's
Yeah.
like think of Medea. Like that's Atlanta.
I
Like,
haven't I
yeah,
haven't seen it, but I will say I really there now I don't know that I could live there, but I really like portions of Virginia. Charlottesville is
oh yes, that's nice,
man.
and that's more like there's some portions of Alabama that are more like that than not. I
Yeah.
guess to the extent.
Okay.
Um, maybe I don't know. Maybe I should say more like North Georgia or yeah, just to shrink the mountain size.
Yeah.
Um, maybe like I don't know. It's just weird. Like like sometimes I just go somewhere and I think like, oh, that looks like just something right in Tennessee or Virginia, and it's like, oh, that looks like something in Georgia. Oh, that looks like something I've seen in Oklahoma.
Right.
Like it's just really weird.
Well, and in fairness to Tennessee, I despise poor Tennessee, man. I was gonna say I despise Nashville, which is true, and I have not been to the historic side. I am aware of that, but then I hate Gatlinburg and
You do?
I hate Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge. Absolutely hate them.
I like them, but it's because I've
Okay.
I've been there like almost every year of my life, and
Okay.
it's kind of like almost like I think it could be a second home.
Really? Well, see now I've only been there once, so you must have been to good areas I haven't been. Now I like the Smokies, but
Yeah, I mean like when I mean by like a second home, I don't mean
yeah,
like live right down on the strip. I mean like
yeah,
I could literally live like on some. Which that's the thing is like if you get off on the back roads there, like
yeah.
you'll go through normal America, and it literally
That's
like
fair. Yep.
I mean it's literally like there are some places I drive by there that look like places almost like near where I live.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I guess like who do I have more in common with? You know?
Yeah. Well, and that goes into that through line we were talking about rural peasant class versus the elite class. So
Yeah. Well, I meant more in the sense of like the I get well I guess that would kind of play into like the environment, the sense of like there's a house that's backed up against a mountain or a
Yeah.
hill.
Yep.
That's more like where I live than like, oh, it's like flat on the coast
Well, see now,
with the big
yes,
old breezeways and
I do not understand coastal living. If I was a dude in my 20s and I just wanted to surf all day, I understand that. But just the beach for the beach and I don't understand
yeah, I
that.
never got like what people like about like going to like sit in the sand and drink beer all day. Like
I don't know,
put me
man.
in a rocking chair in a cabin if I'm gonna do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, and oh, I was going to say that is one thing I'll absolutely give a lot of portions of the South. Now, I said earlier, my Midwest is the Great Lakes area, but even there, so you'll find some lakes and you'll find some hills, but even there, boy, if you're looking for something other than flatland, the South has the Midwest beat. I'll 100% give them that. They have they have the land. They do not have the weather, but they have the land.
Yeah, I definitely like the land, but I'm not the big fan of the weather, at least the heat.
Yeah. Well, so and that's a going back when we were talking about parasite loads and all that. It's actually there are let me figure out a diplomatic way to say this. I think it's both cultural and environment. There are people in the South that could work me under the table. There is also a group of people in the South who work when they need money and who don't answer the phone calls for their business and who just don't show much gumption. And I cannot stand dealing with those people.
Yeah,
So that's I think that was nice enough. There's
you're probably not gonna ruffle any feathers in this space. We're all hardworking,
I don't
hardworking.
I don't know what that is though. You know, generally speaking in the Midwest, of course you'll find bad apples everywhere. Generally speaking in the Midwest, if you've got something that needs done, there's five different folks that you can call and four of them are going to get right back to you and they're going to be bidding for that job and they're going to want it. And then if you call five folks in the South, praise God, you got one call back and he actually showed up when he said he was going to show up. And then two of them might call you back and they might show up. And then the other two, who knows?
I have noticed that they're like in regards to like trying to get people to do stuff.
Yep.
Like I've always noticed that like instead of people like, hey, I can't. It's just like they don't. There's no, they want to give like a non-answer. Like, hey, you free tomorrow night? Maybe. Never give me an answer, but or like
Yeah.
whatever. And it's just kind of like, can you not just tell me like, oh, I don't know, or no, I want to stay home. You know, like
Yep.
people don't want to give like a straight answer. Can you help me with this? Just kind of like just non-answer.
Yeah.
Maybe that speaks to me and my character though more.
It might. Well, and like I said,
People don't want to come help me.
there's I actually, when I said it might, I thought you were saying that in a positive way about yourself. Like,
No, 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 no. I do have a friend though that like he kind of plays sort of like a most. I'll say this: most men when they go do yard work, they they get it done on their own or with the help of their family members. I know
okay,
a guy that's got a family, but anytime there's something yard work wise to be done in this house, he's trying to call people over to
yeah.
help him. And I think a lot of it is that he really actually just does not want to do this work. He
Well, I
thinks,
was gonna say, does he work hard when people come
uh,
over?
no, I've been over. It's like it's like really. remedial tasks that could get done in 10 minutes if he like buckled down and did it.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah,
like,
yeah.
okay, like one of them. I remember one time we went over to his house to pull some dirt up so he could plant some flowers or something.
Yep.
And I remember this guy basically like sat there and just drank the whole time when we were out there doing it. And instead of like shoveling, he just sat outside and drank. And it's like I was like already halfway done with my portion of the work. Um, by the time he like decided like actually like start working. And
And that is an aspect of the South that I
drinking and working at the same
do.
time.
No. That so that's an interesting conversation about what it means to drink and all that. Actually, so on my stream last week when I was reviewing Greener Pastures, part of that was talking about a girl that was um, she was out of Minnesota and she couldn't handle her beer, and it
Yeah.
just it, it's different in the it's different in the South versus the Midwest. The drinking culture. Um, where was I going?
Are people
But
in the
it's just
Midwest more reserved with it?
yes, yes, and what that means is now okay. If you're going to Ohio State and Michigan, one, they're ultra diverse, blah blah blah, and then two, they're college students, and a lot of them act like jackasses. In general, in the Midwest, it's a lot of beer. It's not as much liquor, not nearly as much liquor,
Mm,
and if you can't handle your beer, it's
you're basically encouraged not to drink.
no, not even. Let me figure out how to. So I talked about it on that stream, and I'm trying to remember exactly what I said, but it's almost like a failure on your part if you are incapable of. Now, people can be strong enough to say no, I just don't drink. But if you drink beer and you're incapable of controlling yourself, it is almost just a black mark on you as a person because everybody can drink beer. Everybody can handle beer. What is so wrong with you that you're incapable of controlling yourself around your alcohol? Whereas it's been my experience when you are in the South, when you're in different areas and they're going to the bar, they're going to get blitzed. Like that
Yes.
drinking is a recreation in and of itself. Whereas up in the Midwest, it's well, I'm going to the bar to drink a couple beers. All right, well, I'll see you in a couple hours. Yep. And so you're not worried about designated drivers. You're not because like you're just going to drink a couple beers.
That's something that I find almost like alien to like the southern bar scene. It's like people going to the it's like yeah, they're going to get messed up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And usually those people are kind of a more like lower class. The people that are of higher class that drink seem like they
Yes.
do it at home. They don't do it in public.
So very interesting point you're making there. When in the Midwest, there's pubs, there's taverns everywhere. And you go and you from the time you're a kid, you're there because it's not a big deal. There's just beer everywhere. And people drink all the time because it's I don't know how to emphasize how much of a how ubiquitous it is and how
Do you think this has to do though with like more like urban German society, like in the
I don't
sense of
know.
like
I don't know. Drinking is not a big deal in the Midwest. Like you just do it. Now again, like I said, there's far less liquor. Far less liquor. There is no bourbon trail.
Yeah, that's a thing that a lot of people like. I've noticed like a lot of these people online that like Southern accounts, they're very big up on their liquor, and it's like looking at like it's made in Kentucky and Tennessee.
Yep.
But I mean, I don't really drink myself. I kind of come whew, from a background that's like a sort of anti-drinking because of religion.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like if I drink, like it is just beer. I don't drink liquor.
Right.
I don't like liquor personally. Really, just there's no enjoyment in that.
Yeah. Well, and I've left with are you mutuals with Tex on X?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So he and I have joked back and forth that all prohibition was anti-German sentiment from Ulster Scots that couldn't handle their liquor, and so since they couldn't, nobody else should.
I mean, that's probably like kind of a good micro. Uh, what would you say? I guess a good analogy maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that it's 100% true, but it makes sense in my head
Well,
because prohibition and running alcohol and moonshine was such a big deal. And then with the Germans, it's like, huh? Why is this even a thing?
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe I have more of those German sentiments than I would previously think, because like my whole view of drinking is like yeah, like we would be going up to the bar, like whatever the bar, just to get some beers and like go home,
Yeah.
like but everybody else I know is like let's get let's go flip a table, let's go
Right.
rave, let's go do as many lemon drop shots as possible till we fall down, I'm against that, that kind of from a secular perspective. I'm against that in the sense of it's making a fool of yourself in public. But I always approached it more from a religious sense. It's wrong to be getting crap faced and raving and having dissensions in public, but it's not wrong to go sit quietly and watch the TV and drink like 4 beers.
Yeah. Yep. So
So that's kind of my take on it. I don't know. Maybe I have some German ancestry that I'm just not aware of.
there's an old plot fella somewhere back in the line.
I mean, there could be. I mean,
Right.
somebody in my family said that my so my mom's dad's side. Somebody said that they were Black Dutch, and as a kid, I always thought that they were like slaves of Dutch people, like the West Indies. Apparently, Black Dutch is like possibly Spaniards that were there during when the Habsburgs controlled it. I don't think I look anything like a Black Dutch or Spaniard or whatever. Um, I'll tell you this though: when I went to Iceland, the people I were with, this is like, you know, people I was with were upper class Southern stock, but they all were like tan, black hair, beady Irish eyes, Irish last names, Celtic last names.
Okay.
And it's like I just kind of looked at the people I was with there, and I was like, I look more like them. Like if you just dropped me off in Iceland, you would assume I was Icelandic.
Yeah. Fair enough.
And it's just like it was just kind of weird. So
Yeah.
I do feel like I have that Nord kind of look.
It's possible. It's possible. And it's interesting that the US is English. Let's lead with that. Okay. So the US is English, but absolutely the Northwest Continentals have been here for forever. I mean, when was New Amsterdam founded?
Like the
So then you have
1600s. But then you look
right.
at like the Earnharts, it's like they're here
Uh-huh.
before the American Revolution.
And I'm thinking the plots were here. I think that was prior to the American Revolution, and so you've had a single family, you have had groups of families, and you have had full on settlements that ended up getting sold to the English or won by the English or whatever. But it is curious that they just kind of come out here and do their thing.
It is. It is.
Yep.
I was gonna say, what time is it for you?
I'm it's late enough. We can call it whenever.
Okay, because I was gonna say I have to be in bed in the next about hour.
Yeah.
I gotta get some stuff done before I go to bed, and I'm not really thinking of anything interesting to say. I know you got tons of interesting stuff. I'm just I'm kind of getting tired, and like I'm running out of
No, we're
ideas to
fine.
say and things. And I do think that the alcohol thing's interesting though, because I need to go. I think research Scotch Irish people a little more. They are wild.
Yeah, and hmm, but that's almost not fair to them either. I mean, even within them, you'll have some people with more integrity and some people with less.
Well, they're
There's
honored.
just
They're honorable.
well, that sword, every sword cuts both ways. And so sure, honor based, but what does that mean in a given family, in a given clan, in a given holler?
That's true.
Yeah. So it's curious. They're a curious group of people.
Hmm,
Um, yeah, I don't know. All the knives cut both ways.
that's
So
true.
yep. But yeah, that's fine. I appreciate you having me on,
Oh no,
and
you're good. I'm glad that
I know we just kind of wandered, but
yeah, you're good. Not all who wander are lost. We had to get bring us some Tolkien, and that's another thing too. Is I'm not as versed on Tolkien in the books as I am the movies, and I'm one of those people like if I haven't read the book, I don't really want to. I don't want to like use the movie as my crutch for all this stuff.
sure, that's something we could dig into one day.
Well, I mean,
But
I'm fine to do that because whatever. Um, I need to be read. I've started my new program of like the summer of reading, so
oh, very good.
I'm basically like quit the Xbox, quit the
Yeah.
games, at least on the weekdays. So it's going to be straight to reading, but we'll see what's happening. But I'm going to hit end record on this thing. Thank y'all for listening tonight. I hope y'all got something out of this. Either don't drink too much and stay humble and proud.
Thanks